Hello, Archie Dunlop here with Talking Astrology with Archie on Friday, September the 1st, 2023. Happy September! And today I want to talk about someone who may be controversial. Not everyone here might be his biggest fan. That is George Soros, the financier, the man who broke the Bank of England on, I think, September the 16th, 1992, with his bet against the pound. Someone who is very active in supporting particular policies. Specifically, he's given a lot of money to the Democrats in America. He has supported democracy and open society in Eastern Europe. At least that's how he sees it. Yeah, I thought I'd look at his horoscope. And I do want to look at the Black Wednesday when he broke the Bank of England. I also want to consider why. Why has he put so much effort into, trying to change society, trying to change, the way things are? Why? What's the point? What's motivated him? What's motivating him? Can we see it? Can we see it from his horoscope? Yeah, we can certainly see it from his biography, but can we pick up anything in the horoscope? No, I'm just trying to be neutral here. I'm not trying to push any view of George Soros. I'm sure you have your own views about George Soros. But yeah, I haven't looked at his chart before, so I thought now would be a good opportunity. But before I do that, I want to look at the astrology for today, which is Friday, September the 1st, 2023. So here we go. Okay, so there is the positions of the planets for today. As always, set for New York at noon. So what's the big thing? You will notice that the moon is in Aries at noon in New York. Now, it kind of depends on what your time zone is. So, if you're in London, the moon goes into Aries today at 25 past 2 in the afternoon. If you're in New York, it goes into Aries at 9:25 in the morning. If you're on the West Coast, it goes, that would be 6:25 in the morning. On the other hand, if you're Far East Asia, Australia, New Zealand, the moon is not really going to go into Aries today. So it kind of depends where you are. But certainly in the Americas, for pretty much all the day, all the waking day, the moon is going to be in Aries. So that's the main thing going on. The moon, while it's in Aries, indeed, immediately after it moves into Aries, makes an opposition aspect to Mars. So, particularly if you're in America, Western Europe later in the day, there is going to be a Moon-Mars feel to the day, and Moon-Mars aspects can be quite tense. People can explode. People can get irritated. Very easy to get annoyed. So who is going to get annoyed? Is it you who's going to get annoyed, or is it someone else who's going to get annoyed? Yeah, it's just quick to lose one's temper. I mean, that makes sense because, the moon sort of represents one's feelings, and Mars is the planet of anger, aggression, and so you put moon. Moon is the way we feel. Mars is the challenge, and so when the challenge turns up, we are quick to fly off the handle. Um, you know, we have to be careful what we say. You know how it is. You say something by mistake, you don't really mean it, and someone just goes completely ballistic, and it's really unfair. So it's that kind of situation. If you're the kind of person that doesn't really choose their words carefully, then yeah, you could get yourself into trouble. So that's one thing I would like to say about today. Also, Mercury continues to be on the Mars-Saturn midpoint. I think it's square the Mars-Saturn midpoint. There's Mars, there's Saturn. So you can see Mercury is square the Mars-Saturn midpoint. So, I talked about it yesterday a bit, I think. And so with Mercury on the Mars-Saturn midpoint, we can perhaps find ourselves having some strange thoughts, being, somewhat negative. Even quite dark thoughts. So if you find yourself spiraling into into negative and dark thoughts, maybe you need to snap out of it. Think positively about it. And especially if you're tempted to tell other people about what you're thinking, you don't want to give a wrong impression. Of course, we shouldn't hide our feelings. But that's a different matter. Yeah, so we have to be careful that we don't get too negative, that we don't get too morbid with Mercury square the Mars-Saturn midpoint. And one other thing is Jupiter. Now, Jupiter is, as you can see, Jupiter is at 15 degrees Taurus. In fact, Jupiter is around 45 degrees from the Aries point. So, with Jupiter on the Aries point, it's a time when, society at large appreciates people with big ideas, big concepts. There's plenty of scope for exaggeration. We're in that kind of world at the moment where things do get exaggerated. Things go over the top. But the issue is that Jupiter is aspecting, as well as the Aries point, it's also aspecting the Mars-Neptune midpoint. So Mars-Neptune midpoint is there. You see Mars-Neptune midpoint. There's Mars, there's Neptune. The midpoint is sort of 0 Capricorn, 0 Cancer. In other words, it's square the Aries point. So we have Jupiter and Aries on the Mars-Neptune midpoint. So with Jupiter on the Mars-Neptune midpoint, we have to be careful about excessive behavior, and excessive behavior in particularly dangerous areas. Mars-Neptune, the Mars-Neptune principle, as I often say, is about sleaze. It's about being tempted to get involved in things which are criminal, immoral, also connection with drink, drugs, as I said, crime. So if you find yourself tempted, if you think it might be a good thing to do, you've got to hold back. Now, I'm sure most of us are not going to be affected by the Jupiter on the Mars-Neptune midpoint, but a few of us might be. So when temptation comes knocking on your door, don't answer it. That's really important. And if you're drinking alcohol, for example, you probably shouldn't be drinking alcohol with Jupiter and the Aries point on the Mars-Neptune midpoint. Now, usually I go straight into my forecast of the 12 signs. But actually, before I do that, I just wanted to just do a very, very brief overview of September. Extremely brief, because it is a new month. I was tempted to put up a separate video for September, but I didn't get round to it. So, what are the highlights of September? Well, the things that come to mind. Firstly, I think it's very soon, a few days' time, September the 4th, I think it is, Venus goes stationary direct. So you can see at the moment Venus is retrograde. So it's now moving very, very slowly. And in a few days' time, it comes to a standstill. And then it starts going forward and resumes its normal course. I think that is good news. I think it's going to be good news for relationships. If there's perhaps been a relationship which seems to have been on, which, has been on hold, then as September progresses, there could be a return to normality. It'll be easier to get on with people, and it's going to also be easier for people to be quite clear about what they want and what they don't want, and as a result, relationships are going to be simpler and more upfront. At the same time as Venus goes stationary direct, Jupiter goes stationary retrograde. Jupiter going retrograde is a bit of a mixed blessing. I think I don't even know if it is a blessing. In Western astrology, when a planet goes retrograde, it does weaken. Ideally in Western astrology, particularly Western traditional astrology, a planet should be going fast and it should be going direct. When it's slow and going retrograde, it is weakened. So Jupiter overall is going to be weakened. Jupiter is the planet of expansion and optimism. Hope for a wonderful future, all of that kind of thing. And so when it's retrograde, pessimism starts creeping in. It's not because the retrograde causes pessimism, it's just that it doesn't provide so much optimism. And, in a way, Jupiter is supposed to, act as a balance to Saturn. And so with Jupiter going retrograde, some of that balance is lost. So we might see a bit of negativity creeping in as the month progresses, as Jupiter starts its retrograde movement. And then in the middle of the month, I think it's 15th, 16th, around there, Mercury goes direct, because Mercury's been retrograde at the moment. You can see there's Mercury retrograde. But its retrograde motion comes to an end in the middle of September. So if we've been holding off on something, perhaps relating to communication or documents or something like that, with Mercury going direct, in Virgo. Mercury works very well in Virgo. Of course, it's a shame it's retrograde at the moment, but during the last half of September, Mercury in Virgo, Mercury going direct, this is a time when we can start to resume normal communications, and when we try to communicate things, it'll be easier to get the message across. So I think that is a good news. One other thing about September, which happens every single September, I think it's around September the 23rd. It is the autumnal equinox. So if you're living north of the equator, particularly in relatively northerly climes, not perhaps on the equator itself, but for example, where I am, Washington State, you're noticing obviously that the days are getting shorter, and of course the spring equinox, the autumnal equinox on September the 23rd is when, by definition, the sun goes into Libra, and when day and night are equal. Of course, when the sun goes into Libra, the sun immediately weakens because the sun is fallen in Libra. So all things being equal, there's every year, end of September, there's a certain weakening there of the sun. For some of us, not quite so easy to assert ourselves, but on the other hand, if we're prepared to cooperate with other people, it needn't be so bad. So anyway, those are some themes for September. I haven't gone into any detail, of course, as the different configurations come up. I'll be talking about them over the month. It's really about what's going retrograde and what's going direct. Jupiter's going retrograde. We've already had Uranus going retrograde, and I've talked about that. But Venus and then Mercury are going direct. So I should say, with Venus going direct, this may be a time, if we've been holding off on any purchases, particularly of things that are supposed to be, beauty, clothes, that kind of stuff. We've been holding off, probably because our judgment is not really trustworthy, our aesthetic judgment. When Venus goes direct, we can perhaps start to reconsider, reconsider things. Have another look at perhaps something we were planning on buying. Does it really look as good as it did a month or two ago? Maybe not. So that's good. I think our taste and our sense of aesthetics will be getting better as Venus goes direct. So anyway, now I want to do my forecasts for the 12 signs for today, which is Friday, September the 1st, 2023. Aries. The moon moves into Aries and straight away makes an opposition aspect to Mars in Libra. On one hand, you feel that you're in a weak position, at least in regard to other people. On the other hand, you're frantic to assert yourself. Well, if you want to strengthen your position, you need to restrain some of your wilder impulses. Difficult, but I think possible. Taurus. Don't be distracted by other people's behaviour. It might be disturbing, but I don't think it affects you directly. Instead, make a decision about what needs to be done and then go and do it. In general, you'll function best when you're on your own, and if you're offered any form of assistance, don't automatically accept it. Gemini. Who knows what's going on in a Gemini's mind? It's far crazier than anyone expects. But you know that thoughts are only thoughts, and today some of your thoughts are bizarre and even morbid. However, you mustn't allow negativity to convince you that a potentially very good plan is impossible to achieve. Yes, you do have to make an effort to think positively. You still have to be realistic. No harm in being realistic, but being realistic is not the same as just pouring cold water on everything. Cancer. there is an opposition between the moon, your ruler, and Mars. It's across the home and career axis of your solar chart, and you certainly have a lot of energy at your disposal, and your first inclination is to concentrate on business and career. Yet there are foundational issues which need to be taken care of. If you ignore them now, they'll cause you trouble at a later stage. Leo, you're not satisfied, and in some respects you want more of everything, and this applies particularly to your social life and your desire for both attention and amusement. Once you get involved with other people, things can escalate very quickly, and fun can turn into exhaustion in the blink of an eye. Virgo, the world feels confusing. A lot of things going on, and old certainties are starting to collapse. But in some respects, you're the observer, and you don't have to take the situation personally. This means that there's no need to get caught up in negative thoughts. You have to think for yourself and think positively. Libra, you're strongly placed and you're being treated with increasing respect, but you don't want to take things too far. To an extent, you do need outside support, and you can't afford to alienate the people who matter. So take a step back and consider what is expected of you. Nonetheless, it does seem that someone out there is really keen on you. Scorpio, you have a moment of understanding. Everything fits together and the next steps seem obvious. Yet it's a realization that is private, and you can't expect the outside world to understand what's going on. So in the short term, you may have to keep your thoughts to yourself. Elsewhere, you can do some quiet reorganization. Sagittarius, you're capable of stirring things up through the power of your words, but some of the things you might say may not be wise. Your words might be coarse, and your message could be completely unsubtle. We know you mean no harm, but what about everyone else? Maybe you can have fun without undermining and confusing the people around you. Maybe. Capricorn, there is a bit of anger in the air, strong opinions, and a refusal to compromise. The anger could come from many directions, but activities connected with family and home could be unexpectedly stressful. Your job is to diffuse the situation and in most cases not to take sides. Sometimes it's okay to lose an argument for the sake of keeping the peace. Aquarius, a lot of what you need to do today is to attract people's interest. If something is boring, it is not going to be effective. But if you communicate with passion and you're interested in your own message, then getting support shouldn't be a problem. However, religious and philosophical issues should probably be avoided. Pisces, you have your own ideas about money, which may be right or wrong. You might feel that it's best not to discuss financial issues because that would avoid comment and criticism. But if you don't get feedback, how are you going to know if you're on the right track? An honest discussion could be helpful. So what I'm going to do now is turn to the I Ching. So the first hexagram I got, remember I threw 3 coins in the air asking the question, what is Friday going to be like for visitors to my YouTube channel? So the first hexagram I got was limitation. This hexagram is telling us that we do, in most cases, need to exercise some discipline. Maybe in the past or recent past, we've gone over the top in a few areas. We've perhaps overextended ourselves, and now we need to rein it all in. But the I Ching does give a warning here, because the fourth line here, it moves, and it makes the distinction between the kind of limitation that is natural and the kind of limitation that is just really hard, really hard work. We have to use a constant effort to create the limitation. I suppose what's an example of that? If we, I don't know, we're hungry, for example, and we deliberately decide not to eat, and we're still hungry. It's just a huge amount of effort to not eat. And the I Ching would suggest that if a limitation is a lot of effort, then perhaps it needs to be reconsidered. Of course, some things are a lot of effort, and that limitation is really necessary. If we've got financial issues, sometimes we have to limit our expenditure. I don't know, if we've got weight issues, then we might have to limit what we eat. But, for sort of issues which aren't perhaps as major as that, for sort of day-to-day issues, if we feel that we're just limiting ourselves almost for the sake of it, out of some puritanical kick, maybe that's not such a good idea. Limitation should be absolutely natural. It shouldn't hurt. I think that's what the I Ching is saying. So we get ourselves together. We curb things that have got out of control, and then the hexagram moves, and the movement is to hexagram number 58, the joyous, which is sort of very different hexagram. This is quite a fortunate hexagram. The symbolism here is you've got a lake, and you've got two lakes, one above the other. It's very watery, and so we can really start to enjoy ourselves. I mean, not in a crazy way, just to, just relax. Perhaps talk to friends, family, communicate with friends, family, be in a happy environment, and just relax. So this limitation that I talked about I don't think it's going to be a feature for the whole day. We're going to have to exercise some discipline at the beginning of the day, but by the end of the day there is more scope for relaxation and enjoyment. And I suppose it's a Friday. Friday evening is often a time where people relax, have fun, go to parties, all that kind of stuff. So maybe that's something you can consider. So let's now go back to the astrology and consider George Soros. I understand that he is, in some respects, quite a divisive figure. You can tell that on the internet. There is you get so much stuff on the internet, isn't there? Sort of criticizing George Soros, connecting him with internationalism, the New World Order, whatever. But maybe we need to consider why that might be the case. When I talked about, I don't know, a week ago or something, I talked about Klaus Schwab, who founded the World Economic Forum, and I tried to sort of understand, why he might believe what he believed. So here's George Soros's chart. People born in the 30s have seen. He's born on August the 12th, 1930. He was born in Budapest in Hungary. He'd seen the consequences of the German invasion of Hungary in 1944. Jews being deported to the concentration camps, the absolute chaos of the Second World War. And so, I suppose from his perspective, he probably took the view that nation states were not really a very good thing. And I think that's kind of understandable, seeing what is done in the name of nation states. So perhaps that kind of triggered a lot of it. He apparently his father, I think, spoke Esperanto, and I think that George Soros speaks Esperanto. So, Esperanto is this made-up language which is supposed to be logical, to have logical grammar, logical vocabulary, and and the sort of the principle of Esperanto is that it can cross borders. It can be an international language, and totalitarian regimes have not taken kindly to did not take kindly to Esperanto. Not the Nazis during the Second World War, they went out of their way to persecute people who were advocates of Esperanto. Also in the Soviet Union, even though I think this is Esperanto. I think was it developed in I think it was it Russians who developed it someone anyway, but it was quite big in East Central Europe, and so under Stalin's time, advocates of Esperanto were also persecuted. And so, you can understand how George Soros, as an Esperanto speaker, who had seen, the horrors of the Second World War, might be inclined to have an internationalist view of the world. And looking at Soros's horoscope, we can get some idea about what might be going on. He was born with, there's his Uranus was. I don't have a time of birth for Soros, so it's not an entirely easy chart to get into without the time of birth. But starting off with some of the outer planets, he had Uranus square Pluto, Uranus square Jupiter. So Uranus in Aries square Jupiter square Pluto, and you see that Jupiter-Pluto he's got a Jupiter-Pluto conjunction which is not very exact. It's sort of 9 degrees apart, but his Uranus is square the Jupiter-Pluto midpoint. And so, the principle of Jupiter-Pluto in astrology is about the desire for self-improvement. But, not just mild self-improvement, really fanatically believing one should be improving oneself. And so there he has his Uranus square Jupiter-Pluto midpoint. So that is about, really, really wanting to improve, probably not just himself, but probably the rest of the world, maybe. Don't forget, he's a Leo. Leos perhaps believe they can do a great deal. And, of course, Leo, it's a fire sign. Leo's not often, but, Leos can be a little, they can have a high opinion of themselves. And they can have a high opinion of their particular philosophy on the world. So perhaps that's what's happening. He has a philosophy on the world, Sun in Leo, and Uranus on a Jupiter-Pluto midpoint, it gives him an enormous desire to not just change himself and his own financial condition, but to move that on to the world at large. Now, these are outer planets, Uranus square Jupiter square Pluto. For many people, the outer planets don't really have an impact. But if you're George Soros, someone who without doubt is changing the world, whether or not you like the changes he has put into action, that's beside the point. He is able to change the world. Okay, not necessarily in a dramatic, total way, but he can certainly cause a lot of change. And so there is his Uranus on the Jupiter-Pluto midpoint, and I think that's perhaps how it's working. Pluto, Pluto is also relevant when you look at his Uranus. You'll see that he's got Uranus conjunct the North Node. So if you've got Uranus conjunct the North Node, okay, I understand that a whole generation of people will have Uranus conjunct the North Node in Aries. And most of those people are not going to be able to put that into action. But if you're someone like George Soros, who is destined to be very famous, very successful, and very influential, you can be one of the few members of that generation who can actually manifest Uranus conjunct the North Node in Aries. So Uranus conjunct the North Node in Aries is about creating change, even creating revolutions, and doing it in a very assertive way. In terms of creating revolutions and so forth. George Soros had an early interest in the old communist bloc. He used his resources to try to create change in Central and Eastern Europe. He set up his Open Society Foundation to, create open societies in Eastern Europe. I mean, open societies as he saw it. And he thought he could create big change in that way, hence Uranus conjunct the North Node in Aries. And so Pluto is on the Uranus North Node midpoint. So again, this is someone, North Node is about contacts, Uranus is about revolutionary contacts, and Pluto is about transformation. So you bring it all together, and here is someone is able to really utilize these outer planet energies to create change in the world in which he is in. As far as the personal planets, it's interesting, this chart, but I've started looking at I've looked at the outer planets first. I just feel that in his case, he's an exemplar of a generation. He's part of that generation. He was born in 1930, and he's able to bring these outer planet energies down. And the focus is very much on Pluto. Pluto, as I said, Pluto is square the Uranus node midpoint. Pluto is, as I said, square Uranus. And look at that Pluto. Pluto is at 1957 Cancer. Look at his sun. His sun is at 19 Leo. And look at his Mars. It's at 1940 Gemini. So you see this pattern. Sun, 19, 19, 19. That means he's got Mars semi-sextile Pluto, Sun semi-sextile Pluto, Sun sextile Mars. Sun sextile Mars is about someone who really knows how to assert himself. Sun in Leo, sextile Mars in Gemini. Sun in Leo, very well placed Sun in Leo. Mars in Gemini, is, I suppose, about the ideas and about assertively pushing a set of ideas. And then you've got Pluto on the Sun-Mars midpoint. So here is someone who is able to really assert himself, and it's a very sort of masculine thing. Sun and Mars, masculine, assertive, quite fiery planets. Pluto on that midpoint. Yeah, he's able to create huge effects with that, and so that Pluto is I think key to understanding his chart. Then there is something else about his chart, and continuing on the theme of outer planets. Now, in the past, some of these videos and some of my comments on the YouTube, on my YouTube channel, I have been very negative about Chiron. I really have not used Chiron, to be honest, at all in my astrological career. I played with Chiron, when I first started learning astrology, but I didn't. I had real problems with Chiron, and I still have problems with Chiron. Having said that, George Soros' chart may be an example of a chart where Chiron is important. There's his Chiron. You see, I remember I said 19, 19, 19. There's a kind of another 19 because Chiron is at 1850 Taurus. So he's got an exact Chiron, Sun-Chiron square. And I have a feeling that maybe this Chiron is a major motivator. Chiron, the sort of classic interpretation of Chiron, the two words, the wounded healer. I mean, it's kind of overused, the wounded healer. But you're thinking about a wound. That Sun in Leo is having to deal with a wound. And I mean, what he went through in 1944 and 1945 in Hungary, and what he witnessed, must have been a massive wound, must have been incredibly traumatic, and must have, that's obviously traumatic. Although I think his family survived the Holocaust, I think it was really, it must have affected him, obviously, in a huge way. And it's been sort of personalized with Chiron square his Sun. That is the wound. There is a wound going back to 1944, 1945, I would guess. And that is kind of motivating him. In his case, and I'm not saying one should always use Chiron, but we do not have a time of birth. We have to kind of use we have to use whatever we've got in front of us, and I think that that Chiron is working. I think is working pretty well. I would have said, and I think that does help explain his actions and his approach. Now, as far as Black Wednesday is concerned, I did want to look at Black Wednesday. So Black Wednesday was on September the 16th, 1992, and that's really when George Soros became famous. Britain was part of the ERM, which I think is the exchange rate mechanism. So it wanted to tie the pound to other currencies in Europe. So the idea was that the pound would not move too much against other European currencies. But there were big problems doing that. Britain's economy was shot to pieces. The Bank of England was, I think, trying its hardest to maintain this peg, and it was increasingly not it was having to use more and more resources to do it. And George Soros saw the weakness, and so he shorted the pound, and he, in other words, he would sell loads of pounds in order to to make money if the pound went down. And of course, if he was selling so many pounds, his actions, I presume, were having an impact on the pound itself. So he was able to put pressure on the pound. Seems a bit of a gamble, but I think he knew what he was doing. He's obviously, Soros is a very well-connected, highly educated man who was already very, very wealthy. And his bet paid off, and he made a huge amount of money when the Bank of England, the Chancellor of the Exchequer, announced that Britain had gone off, had left the exchange rate mechanism. So what was actually going on in his horoscope when that happened? So this is a chart for Black Wednesday. This is the chart September the 16th, 1992. I think I've taken it for 7 p.m. I think that's when the Chancellor, Norman Lamont, announced that Britain was leaving. I think that's when he announced Britain was leaving the ERM. So what was happening then? You'll notice that this announcement took place when there was an exact Sun-Jupiter, well, not exact, but the Sun was moving to a conjunction of Jupiter. Now, as far as what it meant for Soros, so let's put Soros's chart in the middle and Black Wednesday on the, we'll do it the other way around. Right, okay. So George Soros' chart is in the middle. Black Wednesday is on the outer wheel. One thing. Yeah, so that's his chart. Chiron. Chiron was fairly exactly conjunct his sun. So while he was doing that, Chiron comes up again. Remember, he had Chiron in his natal chart. He had Chiron square his sun, and so Chiron has come along and conjuncted his sun. Now, you wouldn't normally associate a Chiron transit with making a ton of money, but in this case, it certainly was the case. I wonder what he was feeling, and how what he did related to his view of the world. As a result of this event, Britain was unable to join the euro. There is a view that because of Britain leaving the ERM, not only did Britain not have the euro, but it basically in the end led to Brexit. So it could be argued that in a small way, Soros's actions in 1992 eventually led to Brexit over 20 years later. So that's one view of it. So yeah, I mean, I think the Chiron is kind of interesting there. Then we had the solar arc direction. So a solar arc direction is, remember, when you move everything 1 degree for 1 year. So Soros, I think, was 62 years old during Black Wednesday. So we would move every planet in his horoscope. We we'd move every planet in his horoscope 62 degrees. So let's see what happens if we do that. So let's go back to Soros, and we will okay, so that's Soros's chart in the middle, and there is his solar arc directions on the outer wheel. So there is his Mars in his natal chart. In his natal chart, he had Mars at 19 Gemini. So there's a sextile between the Sun and the Mars. So if you direct Mars to the Sun at the time of the ERM, Mars had moved forward. It moved to 20 degrees Leo. So it was okay. It was a degree past his Sun, but he had Mars on his Sun when that was going on. Then directed Chiron. If we direct Chiron, we see that directed Chiron is at 19 Cancer, which is conjunct his Pluto, and also we see that so that seems that kind of seems quite powerful there. I think that there is I think there's something going on with the directions, but yeah, the Mars on his Sun, Chiron on his Pluto. Remember that Pluto is really important. That Pluto is the focal point of his chart. As I've talked, Pluto. Remember, Pluto is on his node Uranus midpoint. Pluto is on his Uranus node midpoint. So yeah, I think there's stuff going on with the transits and the solar arc directions, which I think is interesting. But when now we're more concerned, or a lot of Soros's opponents, they're more concerned about what he's doing in terms of politics and getting involved in politics. And he is, he gave a lot of money to Biden's campaign in 2020. He gave money to Obama's campaign. He gives money to local campaigns. I mean, okay, we should remember that Soros is a US citizen. So as a US citizen, he's entitled to be concerned about what's going on in the US, and he is entitled, I suppose, to give money. But he's promoting particular causes, which perhaps a lot of you listening to me aren't too happy about, which makes me think, what actually does George Soros do to the United States? How does he actually relate to the United States? So I thought it might be interesting to compare Soros's chart with the United States' chart. So here's the USA, July the 4th, 1776, 5:10 p.m. And so we will put George Soros on the outer ring, and just see if there's any link up there. Soros's Mars is quite close to the conjunction with the United States' Mars. So that Mars conjunct Mars, one interpretation of that might be that there are a lot of people in America who find Soros really annoying and sort of aggravating. That's one interpretation. Another interpretation might be, in terms of recent events, George Soros basically said that the West needs to do everything they can to stop Russia's invasion of the Ukraine. So you could say that Mars he's encouraging the USA to keep going in terms of providing Ukraine with military assistance. So yeah, you could see it like that. So that's his Mars. And look at Soros's Venus. So Soros has his Venus at 2 degrees Libra, and so his Venus is exactly conjunct the USA's midheaven. And assuming that the USA was born at 5:10 in the afternoon on July the 4th, with the signing, that's when the signing of independence was. So that Venus on the USA's midheaven, maybe he's able to charm America. The midheaven is about the government. Maybe he's able to charm the American government, the American leadership. I suppose, particularly if it's Democratic leadership. Maybe the Republicans are not so keen on him. I mean, even he gave a lot of money to Kerry in the 2004 election, which George Bush, of course, won that. Then look at his Jupiter. Soros has his Jupiter in Cancer, and it's conjunct the United States' Jupiter, and it's sort of on the United States' Sun Jupiter midpoint. So this is perhaps Soros's generosity in giving money to certain groups in the US. So there are some interesting tie-ups, I think, between Soros's chart and the United States chart, which perhaps have enabled him to be so influential. So anyway, that's George Soros. It's a shame I don't have a time of birth, but even without a time of birth, I think we get some idea about his chart. I think those outer planets, Jupiter, Uranus, Pluto in his horoscope are really important. And I think the Chiron somehow matters. And I think, in terms of understanding Soros, obviously you've got to think about what he went through in 1944 and 1945. Having said all that, that Jupiter-Saturn conjunction at the end of 2020 at 0 Aquarius. I know it's a long way. It's not exactly opposition his Sun in Leo, but it's a long way off. But it's in Aquarius, the sign opposition his Sun in Leo. I think these are challenging times for him. He has got this idea about the way the world should go, the way nation states should go. I'm not 100% sure that history is on his side, though. I mean, you can see that we said Brexit, we said Trump, the Russian invasion of Ukraine. The nation state, I'm not convinced is completely dead. One wonders, is it going to all be for nothing? I don't know, but certainly with those outer planet connections, I know he gets a lot of criticism, but he is doing what he's doing. He's doing what he was put on the world to put on this planet to do. Maybe you shouldn't be critical. You're just watching someone live out their destiny, and he had a destiny to play out in this world. Anyway, that really is all I'm going to say about George Soros. Thank you for listening, and I will talk to you again tomorrow.